Welcome to the Grow People podcast with Pastor Jason, lead pastor of Revolution Church.
That would be me.
That's him. My name's David Stein. I'm the campus pastor at our Canton location. We have two locations of Revolution Church here in the United States. Jasper, Georgia, Canton, Georgia. We're, of course, online at our online campus, and in Kenya.
Yep.
In Kenya, locations.
Worldwide.
In Kenya. Purpose of the Grow People podcast is to
grow people.
Over the past year, we have discussed things we would normally not talk about in sermons, expanding on some things from sermons, but taking some topics that would be better off in a long form rather than just tweeting out something. And those topics are including, not limited to, things like abortion, LGBTQ, and today will be no exception. We are going to talk about, wait for it, politics.
The third rail.
Nothing controversial about that. But before you get your keyboards fired up, hang on. We're coming to you as your pastors, coming to you as shepherds, hearts of shepherds, to answer some of the tough questions that people have. For example, how does a Christian approach politics? I mean, that blanket statement. What do I do if I can't vote for either candidate? How do you stay out of the fray and yet do what you're called to do as a civil servant? What do you do with people who vote differently than you? And really, we want to get into the question of what is Christian nationalism? Because as you have said many times, sometimes words are co-opted and they become something they were not intended to be. But let's start. Let's get right into it and talk about the Christian and politics.
Yeah, I would just like to acknowledge, I think last week we had like 20 minutes of like laughter and fun.
Yeah. Not today. Not today.
And this week we're going right in.
Yeah.
And partly the reason is because we do have the midterm elections coming up.
Yeah. In case you didn't know.
Yeah. In case you were unaware. So, by the time this drops, it will be within the week.
And it's been so civil.
So civil. I mean,
all these guys really like each other.
Yeah. Everybody's been so great.
Yeah.
And so nice. So there's really not much to say, No, and like you said, I mean, again, in sermons, we typically preach through books of the Bible, and we will address things that come up in that at times. And so I feel like in some ways, when it comes to sermon, I talk about politics all the time because I'm always not always, but I will make reference to things.
And especially the last 3 years.
Exactly. Just in the, and then especially like when we preach the book of Micah as well, there's a lot to be said there. But yeah, the intention of the podcast is to give us another opportunity to have these kind of discussions where we can sit and talk about it and have a conversation, beyond a tweet or a post, so people can hear us.
And not be misunderstood.
And not be misunderstood. And so I'm so glad you opened it up that way, is because that was really, like when we were talking about doing this episode, I said, we were like, hey, what are we going to talk about? And we were talking about the sermon, out of John 16. And I said, yeah, but I also kind of have this like wild hair. And when I said wild hair, you immediately like perked up. You're like, wild hair, what is that?
Yeah.
And so as we talked about it, both of us felt like, we should discuss this because we are pastors. Well, first and foremost, we're followers of Jesus. And so we have to wrestle these things as just followers ourselves. And then we are leaders of people who follow Jesus in the church. And so we feel a certain responsibility to help people in our church. And we've had a lot, like you mentioned, copious amounts of conversations over the last 3 years about political things, just given the nature of the political discourse and, civil issues that have taken place. And so, so back to your question, the original kind of setup for this is Christianity and politics. and talking about this, something that we discussed and we've had this conversation a lot is I think there are, I use the analogy and I didn't come up with it, but I say it a lot. On either side of the road is a ditch. And so therefore for every mile of truth, there's 2 miles of lies, and I think you can apply that.
I'm laughing because I will hear people try to explain that and they'll be like, okay, on the road's a ditch.
Yeah.
No, on either side of the road.
I'm in a ditch and you're on the road. What? Yes, you are in a ditch. That's what we're trying to say. Yes, on either side of the road is a ditch.
Yeah.
Which means there's multiple ways to be wrong. I can go, which ironically speaking politically, right and left, you can veer off too far. And so when it comes to politics, I do think there is a way to over-identify our Christianity with politics. And what I mean by that is almost have what some people would call an over-realized eschatology, where we think about the world in either kind of these either-or terms of like, this world is all there is, and so that's all that matters, like there's no world to come, or go into the other ditch of, no, this world is going to fall away and, this earth is going to burn up and we're going to get a new one, so I don't care about what happens in this world at all. I'm just waiting for the new one.
I've never heard that term, over-realized eschatology. That's excellent. And that would explain many of the people that I know, even in my own family.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
And I didn't come up with that term, but yeah, and the term eschatology is just the study of end times, and so an over-realized eschatology is whatever I think about the end times affects how I live now.
Right.
And so I think the temptation for a lot of Christians is one of those two ditches, is we over-identify our Christianity with political things, with our political discourse, our political parties. And so you can almost marry Christianity with a political party. That would be one ditch. Or you go the other way and you just completely are out of it altogether. You don't have any political engagement. You don't have any civic engagement, more kind of like the true pacifist, mentality to where people don't even vote at all. And again, I think both of those are wrong, or ditches we need to avoid, I guess is a better way of saying it. So, and particularly when it comes to Christianity, and in America, kind of the junk drawer term that describes most people today is evangelical, which came out of the 50s and 60s. Billy Graham was instrumental in kind of leading that. And so even on the news shows, they talk about evangelicals all the time. And they look at evangelicals as a voting bloc, like a group of people. And, different political leaders try to cater to them. And there have been movements within the last, 60, 70 years of evangelicalism that have over-identified with a party, that have almost tried to marry the state and the church, again, if you will. And so I do think that, and ironically, it was particularly Baptist, but Christians in the founding of our country, and we've talked about this before, that articulated the separation of church and state. And I've heard it said before, whenever you try to marry the church and the state, the church loses. So as Orthodox believers, I do believe in the separation of church and state. And as I've said before, not so much to keep the church out of the state, but to keep the state out of the church, which is what our Constitution says in the First Amendment. Congress will make no laws regarding, freedom of religion and assembly and press and speech. And so therefore, I think if we over-realize our eschatology and almost say, if you're a Christian, you have to vote for this party, to where we over-identify with a party instead of looking at, well, how should I be biblically informed about policies? So I think we have to be careful that we don't over-identify with parties, and we just, and instead of sticking to biblical policies or biblical principles that inform policies
Right.
that we would love to see. So that's the danger on that side. But then the danger on the other side is we disengage completely.
Mhm.
You know, we have no civic engagement. And, you know, just imagine how bad it would be if you took Christians out of everything.
Mm.
You know, I mean, we are called to be salt and light. We are called to be people in our communities that are seeking the welfare, you know, and I think that's one thing in a general sense. I think the best way to think about how Christians engage with politics is Jeremiah 29:7, which we've taught through this before, which ironically, you know, I shouldn't say that, but Jeremiah 29:11 is a verse that people quote often.
Put on coffee mugs.
Yeah, I've joked about that, which it's a great verse. You know, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. But what people don't know is that was written to a group of people, to the Jewish people that were in exile.
Mhm.
And he told them that on the front end. So they were about to have 70 years of real hardship,
Yep.
of real pain. So the reason why I mess with people quoting that verse, they don't realize what they're saying when they say it.
Yeah.
You know, like they just use it as a rubber stamp of oh, I got a prophetic vision and it's always good. You know what I mean? Like God's going to expand your life and all this kind of stuff. Which again, I'm not saying God doesn't want to bless us. He does. It just doesn't always look like what we think.
Right.
But ironically, if you go right before that verse in the preceding verses of chapter 29, Jeremiah is speaking to the exiles and he's telling them, really the Lord is telling them what he wants them to do while they're in exile. So they're in a foreign place, not their home, not their destination, their future destination. And that has been interpreted, even though that was written for a specific group of people at a specific time in history, most New Testament scholars or believe Christians would read that and kind of interpret that metaphorically to our situation. Like we as Christians are exiles. Earth is not our home. Again, that was the whole overrealized eschatology. Earth is not our home. This is not what we don't envision some utopia on earth.
Right.
We do envision a new heaven, a new earth coming down, you know, at the return of Christ. So what do we do until then? And so if you're going to seek the welfare of the city into which I sent you, that almost gives you your marching orders. That's the middle of the road is what we're saying.
That's Jeremiah 29:7.
29:7.
Seek the welfare
Yes.
of the city to which you were sent.
Yeah, seek the welfare of the city to which you were sent. Exactly.
And that's
right.
that's why we're in Jasper. That was the
Yes.
entire Multiply campaign.
Yep.
To go to a different city
Yep.
and seek the welfare, because we had so many people coming down to Canton from Jasper, from Ellijay. If we're going to seek the welfare of those cities, we got to be there.
Exactly. We need to be sent to them.
Yes.
And the reason why I think it's important to let that viewpoint frame this discussion on how do Christians engage in politics is one of the things that it frustrates me with Christians is we put, again, from an overrealized things, we put so much on the vote process and not enough on the serving, not enough on the seeking the welfare of our city. So, and we'll talk about voting in a second. But I think as a Christian person, as a follower of Jesus who is trying to bring heaven to earth, that is, again, that new heaven, new earth, the kingdom of God has broken in, then what we are called to do is seek the welfare of our cities. So it's interesting, you know, when let's just say government programs, you know, ironically, welfare being one of them. What we believe as believers is the government shouldn't have to do that because the church is doing it. The government shouldn't have to be the one that is doing what is called restorative justice. You know, again, from a separation of church and state, Romans 13, other places in the text are clear that God has given the state the power of the sword, which that is retributive justice. That is payment, that is doing justice to people who break laws. God has ordained the state.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the state should not be anti-church, and the church should not be anti-state. And by state, we're meaning nations. God has, the Bible's clear on that. He's the one that ordained nations and appoints their leaders and the rise and fall of those nations. He's the one that determines those things. So the nation state has a role to play in God's plan, and that is for retributive justice. That is doing retribution. That is creating laws and enforcing laws. That's not the job of the church. The job of the church is to work with the state for restorative justice,
Mm-hmm.
to restore, to help restore, to be an agent of God, ministry, which is interesting. Like a lot of cabinet positions, we call them ministers, which again comes from a biblical idea of servant. And that's why they have that name, because there's a godly role that God ordained the state to have. So again, we're just kind of talking big picture here. So the role of the church and the role of Christians, which is the church, is to seek the welfare of the cities or wherever they're at, which looks like loving their neighbor.
Yeah.
Loving their enemies, blessing those who curse them.
What?
Yeah. Serving other people as though they are more deserving than themselves. That's what seeking the welfare of the city means.
And I'm glad you framed it that way, because I genuinely don't know if either candidate, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, is going to be able to seek the welfare of Holly Springs, Georgia.
No.
But I can.
Yes.
And that's what you're getting at with people who over-identify with voting and under-identify with serving.
Yes. Yes, that's very well said.
So I can't vote for somebody and hope he's going to love my neighbor.
No, that's not his job.
No.
Or her job.
No.
Whoever it is that you're voting for.
So voting and sitting back and doing nothing is just as bad as not voting at all.
Exactly. Because you are assigning the role of the church to the role of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what we believe as Orthodox, and this is what church fathers have believed for centuries, which is interesting, whether it was Paul, whether it was the early church fathers, you always hear them talking about praying for their leaders. That's what Romans 13 says. Pray for your leaders. Well, we really like that commandment when it's our leaders in charge. We don't like it when it's the other ones.
No.
And my point is to say, like, we have a role to play.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our job to pray for people. It's our job to serve people. It's our job to seek the welfare of our cities. And so,
and it's challenging and convicting to do that.
Yeah.
To actually sit down and in your prayer time say, okay, I'm going to pray for the president of the United States because he's the president.
Yeah.
Not because of what he does, not because of what he believes. I'm going to pray for him for wisdom. I'm going to pray for him for strength. I'm going to pray for him to have a change of heart in certain areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, that's good and right. But really what we're getting at here is Christians should engage in politics or civil matters way more on the local level.
Yes.
That's what we're really trying to say which is why we as a church have worked with our civic governments in Canton, in Jasper, in Cherokee County, Pickens County. We have asked our leaders, hey, what do you need and how can we help? What are the needs of our city?
Yeah.
How can we be a blessing to these people? Because we not only want to build a great church, we want to build a great city.
And it's not based on what that person believes.
No, we work with all different kinds of elected officials. Mayors that don't vote like us, that don't believe like us, biblically speaking. Which again, I think that's important to send a message of, but I don't have to agree with somebody on, let's just say, what marriage is in order to help serve the homeless or the poor, so we can find areas where we can seek the welfare together in ways which ironically, will give me an opportunity to influence them based upon what we believe. And I think that's the part that is lost
Right.
in a lot of our discourse today and partly because of news and social media, and again, I'm not outright blaming those things, but what I'm saying is they become immense time wasters where we're so, like, we know what's going on in every race across the country, but yet we don't know what's going on with our neighbor down the street. Well, how is that seeking the welfare?
Right.
If I want a better nation, it's going to be made up, particularly in our nation, because of better states. If I want better states, it's because we're going to have better communities. If I want better communities, it's because we're going to have better families. If I want better families, I better deal with the people in those families.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not rocket science in that sense. So I think first and foremost, the lens through which we need to view politics is not so much just about what party or person we're voting for, but what particular situation or person can I help? How can I move outside of the faith community into my real community? And I don't say real as in like faith is fake, but into my natural community, and seek the welfare, seek their welfare. How can we serve?
That answers one of the questions. How do you stay out of the fray, but do your civic duty?
That's the first place.
Seek the welfare.
Yes.
You can easily stay out of the arguments by just going and seeking the welfare of the city to which you're sent.
Exactly. And that's my problem a lot of times with Christians is our first action is simply a reaction to something that's happened.
That's good.
Well, if we're always just reacting to what's happening, then we're not living lives very purposefully.
Mm-hmm.
We're not acting. We're not seeking something. We're just reacting to everything.
And reacting, you lose influence. When you act, you gain influence.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we were talking about this earlier. Andy Stanley wrote a new book, and I haven't read it, but from what I've heard of it, it's good. Not in it to win it. But I did hear something he said about it, which was really good. The phrase actions speak louder than words. Well, reactions speak louder than actions. And so, yeah, right now, all the world hears is our reactions to everything.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see our actions. They don't see, just take like the hurricane that just happened in Florida. Overwhelmingly, the disaster relief is done by believers.
Yeah.
In those kind of situations. I mean, the church is there serving and ministering, and organizations like Sin Relief and other things are there. Samaritan's Purse are there doing. That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
But that should just be our normal rhythm. And so we as a church have taken that stance, and that's the stance that I want people, not only a part of Revolution, but definitely a part of Revolution, to let that be the guiding principle to which they engage politically, is seeking the welfare of others.
Yeah. And that book that Andy Stanley wrote, the premise is it possible to disagree politically and love unconditionally?
Yeah. Great question.
And in that, you have to take the politics out of play and put the person into play.
Yeah.
So is that a person?
Yeah. Well, the answer to that question is yes, because Jesus did it.
Yeah.
His 12 disciples were made up of different political persuasions. He had Simon the Zealot, who wanted to destroy Rome. Mm-hmm. He had Matthew, who was a tax collector for Rome. He had Peter and James and John, who were fishermen, who were kind of like salt of the earth dudes that were like, yeah, we don't like Rome, but we're not, we don't like that. And we're not going to collect taxes for Rome, but we're not also trying to overthrow this sucker too. We're just trying to catch fish, man. You had all those dudes that were his tribe, and yet they were able to sit around campfires and have conversations because Jesus was inviting them into a greater mission, a greater kingdom, a kingdom beyond this world. So yes, we should be able to love unconditionally, even though we disagree politically.
So as we put this into practice, as you may have already done early voting, maybe you're doing early voting this week, maybe you're going to the polls on election day. How does that play out? How does everything that we've laid down so far, How does that play out when we walk into the booth and we pull the curtain? Is there still a curtain? I don't even know if there's still a curtain.
Yeah, sometimes.
When you pull the curtain and you're looking at two names and you're like, I don't know about either one of these.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, in thinking about this question, it's like people listening like, man, that's great. Yeah, we want to seek the welfare. Who do I vote for?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and
that's all great, but tell me about this.
And that's a reality in this state this time.
Well, I would say it's a reality all the time. Yeah. But definitely as our world has become more polarized.
Yes.
For sure. It has become, like you were describing, you were a White House correspondent in the transition between George W. or Clinton.
Clinton and W.
Yeah. You were there, the hanging Chad.
I was there the night of the election. And it was interesting because I was there the end of Clinton and the beginning of Bush.
Yeah.
So 99, 2000. I'm there on election night. And not that there weren't political sides.
Yeah.
There were. And there were political sides within the pool of reporters that I would sit with all the time. But it wasn't uncivil.
Yeah.
And that was kind of neat about it.
Yeah.
And when the president was at the White House, when he was on the grounds, there was even a higher grade of civility, no matter who it was.
Yeah.
That night, everything changed. That night, and I worked for a woman. She is as far left as you could possibly go. And she was actually the only liberal correspondent on the Fox News channel. And they would have her on almost to make fun of her, but she was a sweet soul and just wonderful to work for, but she was way out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, but she did her job fairly.
Yeah.
Until that night. And she is running around. This is a constitutional crisis. And it went from constitutional crisis to George Bush is the devil. That's how far it went, and that's how fast it went.
Wow.
And of course, here we are 20 years later, and it's even worse.
It's even worse. Yeah. Because now it's not just George Bush is the devil, but whoever votes for that person are also devils.
Yes.
Yes. So again, I get the angst of that. And I think the best way to think about this, and we had this conversation too, like we're, as a church, not only is there laws prohibiting us from political engagement, which I think is helpful, is good. But I just think wisdom says that like, we're not going to endorse candidates. Right. We are not going to engage at that level. And there are some churches that do. Just our philosophy and our where we stand on it, we're not going to do that. And so I'm not going to come on here and tell people to vote for a party. I'm not going to come on here and tell people to vote for a certain person. I don't think.
Thank you.
I don't think that is wise.
And as a steward of this church, that's the kind of church I want to be at. I want to be at a church that focuses on Jesus.
Exactly. And that kind of is the setup of like, because the party and the people change. And to your point, like 2,000 years ago,
I'm old, but
when you were doing the White House correspondence 2,000 years ago,
when I was in Rome, those were tough times.
when it went from Julius Caesar to Augustus, or whoever it went to, that's funny. A little bit of levity.
You think this administration is bad? You should have been under Herod.
Yeah, exactly.
That guy.
That is true, though.
Yeah.
I mean, come on now. Americans can be very short-sighted historically sometimes.
And Herod was always on vacation.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just throwing that in there.
He went to his palaces that he was building.
He had a lot of palaces.
He did have a lot of palaces.
We've been there.
Yeah, we have. But where I was going with that is like 20 years ago instead of 2,000 years ago, Democrats and Republicans, they definitely disagreed on the role of government and those kind of things. But there was a lot of things they agreed on, though, that now has changed.
Yes.
Like, I don't know if there's really, I would probably say behind closed doors, there's probably a lot more that they agree on than what they let on to TV and the news. But one of the things is, if if I can villainize the other person and I can scare you of them,
Mm-hmm.
then I can control you. I can get your vote. So where I'm going with that is I would rather not lead a church by telling people vote for this party or this person, but rather to say, look at the policies and how does the Bible inform those policies? How does the Bible inform your view of those policies? And then start there and vote for the best candidate that exemplifies the biblical view of those policies. Now, no one's going to do that perfectly, obviously, because categorically, there's going to be, again, some issues where maybe they're not moral. But for example, like I talked about the role of the church, restorative justice. I feel my conviction is that's not the job of the government. So therefore, I want a more limited government. Everybody wants limited government.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how limited. No one wants a unilateral, all-powerful government. That's when you get, other countries in the world that just oppress people. No one wants someone to have absolute power, absolutely. So we can disagree about the how much it's limited by. And so again, let's just say that one. Well, that may not be necessarily a moral issue of if the government provides welfare or the church provides welfare. You can have a conviction of that, but you might then look at fiscal policy, as far as spending, balanced budgets, those kinds of things. I mean, in this country, we haven't had a balanced budget, and I don't know when the last time.
Yeah.
So again, but you should have a biblical position on those things. And those things, you may not think they are moral or not. They may just be, and what I mean by that is good, godly Christian people can disagree about the role of government. Like, hey, I have a biblical conviction that the government should do this. Okay, I have a biblical conviction that the government shouldn't. And so therefore, start with a biblical conviction and look for the person that exemplifies those. Then you get into more moral arguments, like obviously the one that is so prevalent right now is abortion. And we've done a whole episode on that. So I don't think it's a shock to anybody, at least I hope it's not, that we are unashamedly pro-life. We believe, biblically speaking, that life begins at conception. That is just how the Bible designed it, or that's how God designed it. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the Bible articulates it. And again, the example is, well, when did Jesus become Jesus?
Right.
When did the Word become flesh? Well, he didn't become flesh at some other time. He became flesh at conception. Yeah. And that's how the Bible describes it. And so therefore, for believers, and again, where we land at this church is we would tell people you need to vote for, again, thinking a biblical grid, looking at an issue like abortion. And so therefore, vote for a person that lines up with that biblical view the most. So again, me personally, I would only vote for a pro-life candidate.
Right.
Because that is a moral issue that is not decided. See, that's what's interesting, again, about the role of the state. The state makes laws. And I already said that's the role of the state. But the state, and our founding fathers knew this, but the state only works if the state is enforcing laws on a moral people. You can't have laws with people who don't agree that those laws are moral or immoral. Mm-hmm. They only work, the Constitution only worked because of the underpinning of the morality that came out of the Bible.
Right.
And we've talked about that, where the most quoted book in a 10-year period in the founding of our country in the 1700s was the book of Deuteronomy.
Crazy.
Yeah. So the founding fathers used the book of Deuteronomy to build this nation, to build the moral fabric of this nation. I mean, it's in our documents, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. So my point with that is I think Christians engaging in politics, again, from a seek the welfare perspective, should vote for people that align with the biblical truths or how the Bible informs policies. So it's important, I think, to vote as biblical as you can on policies without getting caught in the entrapment of parties and people, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. So that's a big foundation of how to go out there and approach politics. But I do want to get into something very specific because it's been in the news for the past year.
Yeah.
Every time you pick up something on social media, especially after a Sunday, it's very prevalent, especially in the election season, as churches are inviting candidates to speak at the church, be an honored guest at a church, something that we would not do. And it brings up the phrase Christian nationalism, which has been co-opted.
It has. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny. It's one of those words where if I say it, depending upon what group I'm around, they're going to define it differently.
Yes.
And so there are some people that say that, Christians should, or believers should reject Christian nationalism. And then there's others that say we embrace it. Well, it's like, well, what do you mean by it?
Yeah.
If by Christian nationalism, you mean that one race of people is better than the other, that America was better when it was less diverse, or that we are trying to enforce, like if you're equating America somehow with Israel, again, that's the over-realized eschatology thing. Like that America is the privileged nation, then I think Christian nationalism, there's elements that we should reject, because I do think that there are people that use that term and they almost associate Christian nationalism with white nationalists, and those two get, they cross over a lot. Well, if there's any white nationalist tendencies within Christian nationalism, then that should be rejected. Full stop. Wholeheartedly. However, at the same time, I do think that a lot of Christians have just rejected it because of things like that, and they don't fully understand what they're rejecting. And what I mean by that is, as Christians, we should want people in this nation to be Christians. In fact, we should want people in every nation to be Christian. That's our goal. That's our mandate. I mean, Jesus told us, the Great Commission, go make disciples of all nations. So God's goal is to have his family be made up of Christians of all nations. So we want people in every nations to be Christian. So I want America to be a nation full of Christians.
Yes.
And that's not a bad goal.
No.
Now, if I'm just saying I want America to be a Christian nation, and by that I mean certain rules and principles, but I don't really care about the nation being full of Christians, then I think we're on a slippery slope. Because I do think there's a lot of well-meaning Christians that have, again, kind of misunderstood a little bit about the thrust of Christian nationalism. Our goal isn't necessarily to make a Christian nation. Our goal is to make a nation full of Christians.
Yes.
And then those Christians are going to be seeking the welfare of the city. They're going to be involved in politics. They're going to be leaders of businesses and companies and municipalities and governments. And therefore they're going to bring about a Christian morality into the nation. That is good and right. Like, we should want that. And so again, I think a lot of people don't understand. They just reject Christian nationalism altogether, and they forget, like, well, if it's not Christian, if we're not converting people to Christ, and then those people are having profound effects in their cities, and then enacting laws that make it a better prosperous nation for everybody, then what is the guiding thing that's going to lead this?
Right.
Like if it's not a Christian nation, what's it going to be?
Yep.
Like the alternative to Christian nationalism is not good. And that's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. That's why I think a lot of well-meaning Christians have rejected Christian nationalism because it's been framed as a white nationalist thing or a far-right thing. And I'm saying, yes, we should reject that. But we shouldn't reject the impulse or the mandate to lead people to Christ. And then those Christians create better families that create better cities, that create better states and create a better country. And then enact laws that are informed by Christian virtues and values. I mean, Christianity has had a profound effect. Again, I think the best way to think about this is first century. When Jesus sent out his apostles and his disciples, he said, go into all the nations and make disciples. He didn't say, go make Rome Christian. He said, go make Christians in Rome.
Yes.
But ironically, they made Christians in Rome, and within 300 years, Rome became Christian because they had such a profound effect. Mm-hmm. They were caring for the poor. They were caring for the outcast. They were caring for the diseased in pandemics at great cost to their lives. They were living life on mission. They were seeking the welfare to the point to where the Roman authorities couldn't deny the role that Christians had in making Rome a better nation. Mm-hmm. And so then they eventually won over the places of prominence and power in Rome because of their love and service. And that's what I'm getting at.
No, that's excellent. And I hope that gives y'all a great frame. It's given me a better framework of how to deal politically in this world. And in Andy Stanley's book, he says, look, Jesus never asked his followers to agree on everything.
No.
He gave them a new commandment to obey, and that was to love their neighbors.
Yeah, to agree on everything politically. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying to that. I want to clarify what you're saying and not saying.
Right.
He did say truth.
Yes, agree on truth.
Yeah, what this is. But yes, he is saying, but I'm going to naturally pull people from different backgrounds that are going to have experiences that led them to believe differently about food sacrifice to idols, about, circumcision. We talked about that. I mean, a host of issues that we would consider, to us, we would look at, that's not a big deal, but to them it was.
Yeah.
So yes, the thing that binds us is Jesus, and what the word says is truth. So we are called to agree on that, and then take that truth out and again, convert people to Christ. But our hope in converting people to Christ is that we do create godly families that then create godly institutions. I mean, you can't, and this is the part where I don't like, people will confuse like Christianity with colonialism. Mm-hmm. And that's what they think of as Christian nationalism. To where definitely, I think there are aspects of colonialism that we should reject, the forceful overtaking and those kinds of things. But I think it's so short-sighted to just look at church history and think it's all negative or bad, when churches are the ones that started hospitals. How many hospitals are named after Baptists or Catholics? Churches are the ones that engaged politically. Churches are the ones that created communities that became blessings. Christians are the ones that abolished slavery. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, yes, there were Christians that were unfortunately involved in the practice, which ironically came from a erroneous biblical understanding. Mm-hmm. But it was also people being Christian, like William Wilberforce and Martin Luther King. Like the civil rights movement of the 60s was grounded in the ideals of the Bible, that God created us equal. And I think in our civil rights conversations today, we've just completely subtracted God in the gospel. And I think our civil rights conversations are worse because of it, because we no longer have a core of what we're trying to accomplish.
Right. And a flag with a person's name on it is not going to accomplish what the Bible wants us to do.
No. Yeah. We were talking about that earlier. Yeah. I don't think Christians should be flying flags of obscenities with the president's name on it. No. Again, I'd be hard pressed to think that someone's really following Christ that they're flying that flag.
It's really tough to witness to somebody after that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've talked about this before, even as Southerners, if we're flying a rebel flag outside of our house, well, we just lost the ability to love our neighbor who might be African-American.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the same way, like we've talked about this, your history and ethnicity is Jewish.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody was flying a swastika flag outside of their house, they would lose the ability to influence you.
Yep.
Because you already, and again, that goes back to that first ditch. I do think there's a lot of Christians that have over-identified with a political party or a political person, as opposed to identifying with Christ. Christ is our main identity. And so I shouldn't have any identity. It's not God and country. It's God then country. Country is subservient to God.
Right.
But it's not wrong to love your country. It's not wrong. Again, it's not wrong for a nation to enforce laws or boundaries or borders. Like, we do a lot in Kenya. Well, Kenya, has a real problem with Somalia and the terrorist activity that goes on there. And there was a horrific thing that happened years ago where they came and bombed a university in Kenya. Mm-hmm. So it's not wrong for Kenya to protect its borders and to be a sovereign nation and even let Christianity influence how that is, again, we shouldn't reject that. If that's what you think Christian nationalism is, we shouldn't reject that. But we should reject the idea that God loves one nation more than another, and that nations aren't free to establish their own laws. But we just want to make Christians of those nations so that every nation on earth is full of Christians that are making that nation a better place.
Amen. Amen. I hope you think that this was maybe the healthiest conversation on politics that you've ever heard.
So. Hopefully so.
For a transcript of the show, just write down everything we say. We want to encourage you to make the local church part of your life.
Yes.
Make it part of the center of your life. And that means participating in the life of the local church.
Because it is the center of the life of God on the earth.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about that in a future podcast, making the local church center of your life. A lot of people go into the making of this podcast. Our producer is Chandler Elder. Our head of doctrine and theology is theologian. Our chief evangelist is salvation. I'm going to add a couple each time.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
okay, I was wondering where you were going with
I am.
Yeah.
Our backsliding prevention officer, of course, is lukewarm. It was funny last time. It's not funny this time.
Oh, I'm waiting for the new ones.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Sorry. So I'm thinking.
Okay, because you can laugh at these. Our translator is... well, it may be that people are hearing it for the first time.
That's true.
So,
that is true.
The laughter helps. Our translator is Lexicon. See now
that's amazing.
See, that's going too far.
Is that too much? Okay.
Yeah, because I
went over into a ditch.
You went over into the sarcastic ditch. So that I'm just not going to work. I'm not going to work as hard to do these things. Our lineage specialist is genealogy. Our director of Swedish witnessing is Bjorn again. See, that's what you're waiting for.
That's pretty funny.
Chandler, is that one funny?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, okay. I enjoyed that.
That was good.
And our overseer of Godfather ordinances, Fredo baptism. So there you go. Best advice you ever heard.
As opposed to pedo baptisms.
Yes.
See, just let my responses come. Yeah.
All right.
Trust God and take a nap.
Trust God, take a nap. See ya.
All right.